Remember, Hyderabad continues to be besieged by multiple protests across the city. This is after you had a BJP leader make remarks that were considered incredibly derogatory to Prophet Muhammad and the Muslim community on Monday. Now, that MLA was first arrested by police. Then the police was not given his remand. Now we're learning that there are allegations that the protesters who've been out in thousands since Monday, since Tuesday, demanding that this leader be arrested once again. There are reports that these protesters who had been taken in by the police yesterday, Asaduddin Owaisi, the senior AIMIM leader, apparently, according to these reports, helped in their release. My colleague Swastika Das is with us right now to bring us a lot more clarity. Swastika, I think the essential contention here is that these protesters over the last 3 days were raising particularly violent slogans. That's not true, obviously, of all the protesters. It is just true of one faction of protesters. But in this particular case, where the allegation is being made that Asaduddin Owaisi helped in the release of protesters, were these protesters releasing violent slogans or not?
Well, Toya, it has to be first clearly spelled out that, remember, yesterday there were violent clashes in areas, in Old City area of Hyderabad, especially in Mughalpura, Saidabad, Shalibanda being the epicenter, Asha Talkies. Now, in these areas, there were high police crackdown because protesters were refusing to die down their protests. They were refusing to back down, and after the incidents of stone pelting, police officials say they were forced to lathi charge the crowd to disperse them. There is also a parallel development here and an allegation that is strongly coming in from the local side that many of these police officials barged into the residence of protesters, barged into the residence of women, and arrested many people, and then took them to the nearest police station. They were taken to Kanchanbagh PS. Now, Asaduddin Owaisi, in fact, this morning tweeted saying that MIM corporators on the ground went to the police, submitted a representation, and sought the release of nearly 100 of these detainees, who he says were quote-unquote disproportionately arrested and then taken into custody. Police allegedly barged into their residence illegally and detained these protesters. Now, questions are being raised over the political patronage because a lot of these details at this point in time, whether these protesters were associated with these protests, how many of them were actually stone pelters who attacked the police, and why did the police go into the residences of these protesters and detain them? These are the questions that have to be perhaps answered by the Hyderabad police here itself, and we are going to try for their reaction on the same. But what is also being questioned is why and how were these protesters, who may have genuinely taken part in these protests, in that arson that we saw taking place late last night, how were they allowed to go? This is the allegation that is being put forth from the opposition side, something that the Hyderabad police will have to answer. But there are two first things that need to be put in perspective. Violent clashes took place yesterday. In fact, there were mobs. Mobs went on a rampage. They started vandalizing public property. There was arson, following which the rapid action force was pumped in. The local police was pumped in, along with the paramilitary force, to die down, to diffuse the situation. But it started to go out of hand when there were reports of stone pelting. And that is when the official version of the police is that they had to resort to lathi charging. But why were these protesters and the houses of these protesters something that the police went to? Perhaps they did have some intel, is what we are learning. But that all those details have to be determined. But Asaduddin Owaisi here asking the police to release these detainees has raised question marks over his political patronage, because this area that we are reporting from is really MIM bastion. So questions are being raised that why this kind of unfair or a one-sided behavior on the part of Asaduddin Owaisi as well as the Hyderabad police.
Swastika, stay with us. Just for our audiences right now, Asaduddin Owaisi remains in our focus. He is a senior leader of the AIMIM. We want to play out for you what he had to say to those who were protesting. Take a look.
मतीन भी है ना उसमें?
जी हाँ, मतीन भी।
इरफान रियाज भी है ना?
जी हाँ।
एहतशाम और एहतशाम में चलिए
जी।
और भाई बहुत बुरा हुआ वो, मालूम होते कि मेरे को, मैं मुजफ्फर को बोला और
जी हाँ, जो आके मुजफ्फर कॉपरेटर साहब और समस्त कॉपरेटर साहब आके हम लोग रिहा करे, और आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, जज़ाकल्लाह।
अब जाओ 1:30 बज गया, सुबह 1:30 बज रहे, अब जाओ घर में, परेशान होंगे।
जी
इंशाल्लाह मुजफ्फर समझ लिया कि आप घर पे छोड़ देंगे।
जी, अच्छी बात है साहब, शुक्रिया साहब।
आराम से रहो, परेशान रखो, इंशाल्लाह मालूम होते कि हम हरकत में आए, मगर ये नहीं होना था वो।
जी साहब,
आप जाइए, घर को जाइए, आराम करिए।
जी अच्छी बात है साहब, शुक्रिया, जज़ाकल्लाह साहब।
हाँ, घर वाले परेशान होंगे, आपके जाइए।
जी अच्छी,
ओके,
शुक्रिया साहब, जज़ाकल्लाह।
शुक्रिया।
Okay, let's go back now to my colleague Swastika to understand more. Swastika, you've been on the ground covering these protests over the last 2 days. For our audiences located across India, can you just give us an idea? How large are the protests? There are reports that there is some violent chanting. But how widespread, for example, is that chanting, and what are the main demands of the protesters?
Well, these protests, first thing first, have been largely restricted to Hyderabad. In fact, yesterday was when we saw a lot of these protesters in Shalibanda area of Hyderabad, which has become the epicenter of this protest. Saw many of these local youth taking part and raising slogans against Raja Singh, some of them really controversial slogans. Their main demand is that they are very upset with the court order and they want stringent punishment against Raja Singh, whose derogatory videos have stirred up passions here. And many of these members from the minority community allege that their sentiments have been heard. And in this context, Raja Singh's bail has sort of triggered more protests, and largely we have been seeing these protests erupt late in the night. In fact, early morning, in fact. This morning also, early hours, we saw massive protests and high police crackdown, perhaps for the first time in the last 3 days that we have been reporting on the ground. Yesterday was when police had to resort to lathi charging because the mobs went on a rampage, and there was a point where the protest had been done in a synchronized manner in different areas of Hyderabad. So that's the reason why the rapid action force, paramilitary force, as well as the local city police deployed to their maximum strength, took charge of each of these areas and started cracking down on the protesters. And in the process, more than 120 protesters were detained on charges of arson, stone pelting, as well as for creating a law and order situation on the ground. Officially, we are learning that so far no FIRs have been lodged as yet, but we are awaiting more details on that front. So this is how the situation in Hyderabad has been in the last, let's say, 24 hours. But this morning, remember, Toya Singh, News18 has been doing status check. We visited Charminar, Mughalpura, we visited Shalibanda as well. All of these areas to just take a stock of what the situation is. And right now, it is as normal as it can get. There is traffic movement on the road. However, in the old city area, there is tight police personnel deployment there. Many of these vehicles, the normal traffic routes have been diverted for now because of the situation being volatile there. Shops are shut in protest. Many petrol pumps are shut. Private schools are shut. But overall, the picture that I can give you from the ground is normal. However, politics continue to be playing out over the issue, especially now over the release of some of these protesters near on the word of MIM leader and Hyderabad MP Asaduddin Owaisi. So that remains a big concern among other opposition leaders, saying why were these protesters allowed to go on what grounds?
Swastika, stay